As a Swedish girl who lives in California, I often get the question, what do you guys eat up there in the north? Because there seems to be confusion about that. We know what the Italians eat, we know what the British eat, we know what the Mexicans like to eat, but with the Nordic diet, there doesn't seem to be a clear understanding. So I'm here to answer that question today. And if you want to see my upcoming videos about similar content regarding Sweden and California, then please subscribe down below. Now the big question is, what is the Swedish food all about? Sorry about the weird and boring background. I film these videos on weekend mornings so I don't bother anyone in the house, and all of my neighbors are quiet, so this is my planter box in the background. So when I get this question about the Nordic diet, which by the way, when I say Nordic, I mean like Denmark, Finland, Sweden and Norway, because we've all been like intertwined at some point in history, you know, we've all belonged to one another at some point, then it's kind of hard to explain because our diet is quite basic and it's not tropical or exotic because we just don't live in an exotic tropical place. So it's kind of basic, and maybe it sounds boring to some people, but the history explains a lot, so let's get into that. So when you live in a place that freezes over almost completely 6 months out of the year and doesn't get a ton of sunshine, you have to adjust your diet. Just like if you live in California, you need to adjust your diet because you live in a much warmer climate. If you live in a place that has a lot of fish in the water or in the sea, then you tend to eat a lot of fish, right? That makes sense. In Sweden, it's no different. We've had to adjust our diet for hundreds and hundreds of years based off of where we live and what we have around us, because importing food from other countries was obviously not as common back in the day. And so our traditions are quite basic because they come from the farmers, you know, how they used to live in Sweden. We have a lot of farmers. So something as simple and basic as potatoes are a huge part of Swedish culture. Why? Because they're easy to grow. You can eat it with pretty much anything or anyhow. You can preserve them very easily in something that's called a jordkällare, which is like a basement. It's like an underground little cave where you kept your food to keep it cold and fresh over winter time. And so potatoes was a big deal, and butter, you know, cheese, milk, dairy, anything that you can get from your cows, that was really helpful all year round to fatten up and get your nutritions. I mean, can you imagine back in the day how hard you had to fight just to stay alive? I mean, if you had a bad crop in the summertime in Sweden, you were pretty much screwed, like unless you had friends and family who were really nice and had some leftover foods that they can give you. I have heard stories about my great-grandfather, August, who worked really hard for not that much money, and there's this story that he had to walk from, I can't remember, like from Sweden to Norway, I believe it was, and he had to walk in the snow. I mean, walk. And all he had from his boss as food was some rotten potatoes in his backpack. Like, that's a rough life, and that wasn't that long ago, really. I mean, my great-grandfather, like, he lived up until the 60s, I believe. I think that's when he passed away. So it's not like forever ago that people lived in those sort of conditions in, you know, the Nordic area. A big part of our culture, just like in most cultures, is meat and fish. You know, people went hunting and fishing a lot, and they still do in Sweden. So back in the day, to keep your meat fresh, you would put them in big barrels full of salt, and preferably in a cold area, sometimes with ice, and that would really preserve the fish and the fish and the meat. Sometimes you can also make jerky, so you dried it out. That lasts a lot longer. It's really helpful throughout the winter to eat that kind of stuff. And fermented herring is one of those famous Swedish things that I don't know how long it's been since someone came up with that idea, but if you didn't see it, we have a video on Nick trying it. I've never tried it myself. I became a vegetarian when I was like 13, but it sounds awful and it smells horrific. But I guess that's a delicacy to some people. Of course, vegetables and fruits and berries are a big part of our diet as well as in the rest of the world, you know, but back in the day, I remember as a kid, even though we had access to these sort of things at the store, we would still actually preserve that and freeze it and keep it in the freezer over winter time so that we can take it out to make pies with it or lemonade whenever we wanted to. I remember going to the summer house many times as a kid and walking in the forest with my grandmother to pick wild raspberries, like yellow raspberries, like all these beautiful things, especially blueberries and lingonberries. It takes a while to pick as much as you need, but you know where it came from and it's delicious. These days the grocery stores in Sweden are full of fun and exciting kind of foods. Like we have Taco Friday is a big deal in Sweden, and we certainly cannot take credit for that delicacy. Needless to say, summertime was a lot more of a fun time in Sweden back in the day to eat food. You got to pick your own vegetables and berries and eat fresh meat and all that. In the wintertime it wasn't as fun. You had to eat a lot of porridge and velling, which is a milk and oatmeal mix that a lot of kids actually drink when they're little. I drank that as a kid. It's got a lot of nutritions in it. In the fall in Sweden, and I'm sure in the whole entire Scandinavia, we go mushroom crazy. This is the time of the year where obviously it rains more and you get that moist that mushrooms love, and we go out in the forest and pick as much as we can. We obviously have mushrooms at the store, but it's just a fun tradition. And here's the thing. I don't know about the other Scandinavian Nordic countries, but in Sweden we have very strict rules regarding mushroom places or little spots that we find throughout the forest. So a lot of families have their own spots that they found many years ago, like their grandparents found it and they told their kids and their grandkids, and it's a very hush kind of a thing, like it's a secret. You cannot tell anyone else where you get those mushrooms, especially if you find chanterelles, which is these like little golden yellow mushrooms. They are delicious. They're a delicacy, but we have a ton of them in Sweden. So if you find one of those spots, then you're pretty much guaranteed to have chanterelles available for the rest of your life. Hi, Lexi. I think it's kind of a ridiculous tradition, but also kind of funny. I think maybe it comes from the fact that back in the day it was hard to find food, and so if you didn't have a lot of food and you found an area of mushrooms, then you really wanted to keep that to yourself so that you could come back there every single fall and know that you had mushrooms to pick. Our diet really comes from having to stay alive and surviving, you know, just as best as you could back in the day. And so for some reason we still eat the same kind of foods on Easter, Midsummer, and Christmas. We eat ham, potatoes, red beet salad, salmon, herring, ribs, things like that. Things that are very basic and easy, like sausage and meatballs. Very homemade, easily accessible, local kind of foods. But we make it more fun. We try to spruce it up with sauces like lemon and dill sauce, and it is delicious. I mean, I think that's why we eat it on every holiday, but sometimes I wonder why we didn't just switch it up a little bit, you know? Why don't we have something a little bit different on Midsummer? But I mean, I guess we do in a way. We eat like strawberry and cream cakes on Midsummer, for example. That's a different thing, I guess. What's funny though is that diets like these, like the Nordic diet and the Mediterranean diet, are becoming a lot more popular all over the world because they're low in sugars, low in saturated fats. They're very good for you. You know, you grow it and you eat it. That's the basic component of it. You don't go to KFC and buy sodium-filled chicken, stuff like that. You know, it's homemade, it's homegrown, and I think it's very healthy and good for you. I love that I grew up on this sort of food. My grandpa, that I actually never met, he apparently was so strict about his life as a farmer and, you know, belonging to that last generation that was a farmer, that when grandma cooked food for the whole entire family, she always had to boil some potatoes for him because he never ate anything else that did not come from the ground. So if everyone else ate pasta, then he ate potatoes. I hope you guys have a great day and that you don't forget to subscribe down below. I put up this sort of videos nowadays, like very often. I think it's really fun. I love to share it. Bye.